Good morning, Warriors. Welcome to Morning Adrenaline. Today is Monday, June 15th, 2026, and it is time to wake up the warrior. Hey, listen, today I want to confront something that's going to make you a little bit uncomfortable. What if the thing holding you back isn't your circumstances? What if it's a voice that you've been listening to for so long that you mistake it for your own? In other words, what if you're not as much in control of your life as you think? Think about that for a moment. Every day you make decisions. You decide whether to take action, whether to speak up, whether to take risk, whether to start, whether to quit. You tell yourself stories all day long. I'm not ready. I'll start tomorrow. Maybe I'm not built for that. Maybe it's too late. Maybe other people can do that, but not me. The question is, where did those thoughts come from? Did you choose them or did you inherit them? Because here's something most people never stop to consider. Researchers estimate that roughly 95% of your thoughts, behaviors, and actions are influenced by subconscious programming. Programming you didn't consciously create. And if that wasn't enough, studies suggest that 75% of thoughts you think throughout the day lean negative. So things like fear, stress, doubt, scarcity, comparison, limitations that you put on yourself. So let's do the math. If most of your life is being driven subconsciously and most of your thoughts are working against you, what exactly is running your life? See, it's no wonder you feel resistance. It's no wonder discipline feels hard sometimes. It's no wonder you know what to do, but don't always do it. It's no wonder you start and stop. It's no wonder you feel pulled toward comfort when your soul is calling you back toward growth. And here's what makes this even harder to see. A lot of the programming came from people that you love. Your parents, your family members, your teachers, friends, coworkers, relationships, people that you respected, people who care about you, people who unknowingly transferred their fears, limitations, insecurities, and beliefs. Then the world added its own programming: social media, news, algorithms, comparison, distractions, day after day, year after year, until the voice in your head started sounding like the truth. Not because it was true, but because it was familiar. And familiar thoughts are dangerous because they rarely get questioned. So I'm calling today's episode The Invisible Patterns Destroying Your Ability to Dominate. The invisible patterns shaping every area of your life: your confidence, your discipline, your relationships, your finances, your faith, your purpose, and your ability to enter the state of flow. Because you don't have a motivation problem. You don't have a potential problem. You may not even have a discipline problem. You have a programming problem. Your conscious mind wants growth, but your subconscious programming wants familiarity. Your soul wants purpose, but your conditioning wants safety. And that internal conflict creates resistance. Resistance destroys momentum, resistance destroys consistency, and resistance destroys flow. So if you want to become a high-value human, if you want to dominate your purpose, if you want to become the person that you were created and born to be, then you must first identify the invisible patterns that have been quietly running your life. So listen, here's the question of the day. If the programming running inside your mind is producing the life you're currently living, what part of that programming needs to change? Think about that honestly. Not next year, not someday, right now. What thoughts have you accepted as truth that may actually be limiting your potential? What beliefs keep showing up time after time, avoiding your ability to grow? What story keeps pulling you back toward comfort when you're being called towards purpose? Because your future is not being built by your intentions, it's being built by your patterns. And your patterns reveal your programming. So before we go any further today, I want you to ask yourself this. What needs to change for you to live the life that you want? See, the challenge is most people never identify the pattern. They just simply identify the symptom, the lack of money, the failed relationship, the inconsistency, the frustration, the missed opportunity, the lack of peace. But symptoms are rarely the problem. They're evidence of something deeper because every pattern creates an outcome and every outcome leaves clues. Now, the good news is this. If programming created the pattern, then programming can be changed. But first, you have to expose what's actually happening beneath the surface. So today, we're going to walk through 5 realities that will help you identify the invisible patterns running your life and begin replacing them with something stronger. So first, we're going to uncover the invisible operating system that's quietly shaping your decisions every day. Then we're going to expose the patterns that reveal what's really happening inside your mind. After that, we're going to talk about resistance and why so many people struggle to enter flow even when they know exactly what they should be doing. Then the pivotal point is we're going to talk about solutions and discuss how to rewire the code and begin installing a new identity with intention. And finally, we're going to talk about the cost of evolution. Because growth will always give you freedom, but it will also ask you to let go of things that no longer serve the person that you're becoming. So let's start with reality number 1, the invisible operating system running behind the scenes. The first thing you need to understand is this. You are not consciously leading your life as much as you think you are. Now, that might be uncomfortable to hear. It's uncomfortable for me to think about. But most of us like to believe we're fully in control, full autonomy negating outside influences and influencers. But it's simply and statistically not true. Right now, you probably think that every decision that you make is rational. Every reaction is intentional. Every habit is chosen. But that's not how the mind works. Remember, 95% of your thoughts and actions come from your subconscious programming. Most of what you do today was influenced by what you repeatedly thought yesterday. And most of what you'll do tomorrow will be influenced by what you're repeatedly thinking today. The subconscious mind is like an operating system. You don't see it. You don't think about it. But it's constantly running in the background, influencing your decisions. Things like your confidence, your discipline, your relationships, your habits, your standards. Everything passes through that system. And here's the dangerous part. The operating system you're running today wasn't built entirely by you. Parts of it were installed by your parents, by your teachers, parts by friends, others by painful experiences like traumas, maybe fear or culture or even social media. Parts of it were installed by years of just repetition. And eventually the programming became so familiar that you stopped questioning it. You simply started calling it who I am. But here's the truth. You are not every thought that enters your mind. You are not every fear that you inherited. You are not every limitation that you've accepted. Some of those thoughts belong to old programming. And until you learn to recognize the difference, you'll continue allowing the programming to make decisions your future has to live with. So this is why awareness matters. Because you cannot change a program you refuse to acknowledge. Here's reality number 2. The patterns don't lie. Now, let's talk about how you identify the program, because the subconscious rarely announces itself. It reveals itself through patterns. And your patterns don't lie. Your patterns tell the truth long before your words do. So you say you want success, but do you constantly procrastinate when opportunities appear? You say you want financial freedom, but do you immediately tell yourself that people like you never get ahead? You say you want a healthy relationship, but do you repeatedly find yourself attracted to unhealthy situations? You say you want to get fit, but do you convince yourself you're simply not built that way? See, the pattern reveals the programming every single time. And once you start paying attention, you'll begin seeing that the same thoughts show up over and over and over again. Maybe your pattern is fear of failure. What if I embarrass myself? Maybe it's fear of success. What if I can't sustain this momentum? Maybe it's scarcity. There will never be enough. Maybe it's insecurity. I'm not good enough. Maybe it's purpose. God didn't choose someone like me. Listen carefully. Those thoughts may feel familiar. That does not make them true. The subconscious mind often repeats a lie until it feels like fact. And if you never challenge the pattern eventually becomes your identity. That's how people spend decades living beneath their potential, not because of the lack of ability, because they accepted programming as truth. Your patterns are the clues, and clues need to lead to awareness. But awareness alone is not enough, because even when you recognize the pattern, something else is still happening. And it's something that keeps pulling you backward. So this brings us to the third reality. The reason you know what to do, but don't always do it. Resistance. See, most people think, well, I lack motivation, or I lack discipline, or I lack willpower. But often what they're experiencing is internal resistance. Your conscious mind wants growth, but your subconscious programming wants familiarity. Your soul wants purpose, but your conditioning wants safety. Your future is calling you forward, but your programming is pulling you backward. And that tension creates resistance. This is why you procrastinate. This is why you overthink things. This is why you hesitate. It's why you negotiate with commitments you already made. You know you should work out. You know you should make the call. You know you should launch the business. You know you should have the difficult conversation. You know. But knowing isn't the problem. The resistance is. And the longer you carry resistance, the heavier life is going to feel. You start believing that you're lazy. You start believing that you're inconsistent. You start believing something is wrong with you. When in reality, you're fighting a program that was installed years, if not decades ago. See, this is why flow matters. Because flow is what happens when resistance stops interrupting purpose. Flow is what happens when your identity, your beliefs, and your actions start moving in the same direction. That's good. Let me say it again. Flow is what happens when your identity, your beliefs, and your actions start moving in the same direction. Flow is the absence of internal contradiction. And until you confront the programming creating the resistance, flow will always feel temporary. You'll visit it occasionally if you're lucky, but totally by accident. But you'll never live there. So now the question becomes, how do you break this pattern? How do you interrupt the programming? How do you stop living from inherited limitations and start building an intentional identity? So that's exactly where we're going to go next with reality number 4. And now what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite the code. We have our awareness. We know what the problem is. How do we rewrite the code? Most people think that you can just think your way through it. You can willpower your way through it, but it doesn't work that way, guys, because we're dealing with 95% of our thoughts being subconscious programming. So now the question becomes, how do you actually change this? Because awareness alone changes nothing. You can identify every limiting belief in your life. You can recognize every destructive pattern. You can become completely aware of what's holding you back and still remain exactly where you are right now today, where you were yesterday, where you were last week, where you've been for the last 10 years. See, awareness just simply opens the door, but you need transformation to walk through it. So the first step is recognizing the pattern. So when you hear yourself say something like, I'm not good enough, I'll probably fail, people like me don't do things like that, I'm too old, I'm too late, God didn't choose someone like me. Stop. Pay attention. Because patterns reveal programming, and programming reveals your identity. That is the real issue. The problem is not the thought itself, although a thought can be very destructive, but the problem is the identity producing the thought. Because every belief you hold about yourself eventually becomes a limitation or a strength. See, the thought doesn't come if the identity is strong. The thought is strong if the identity is strong. The thought is weak if the identity is weak. If you believe you're undisciplined, you'll believe like someone who is undisciplined. If you believe you're unworthy, you tolerate things you should never tolerate. If you believe success belongs to other people, you'll consciously sabotage your own opportunities. Your identity always, always, always wins. That's why trying harder doesn't work. Most people spend years fighting behaviors while protecting the identity that created them. And it's exhausting. The solution is not to fight the symptom. The solution is to transform the source. This is where real change happens. And that's where Sisu Vita, my company, is built different. See, we're not about motivation. It's not about forcing discipline or gridity, what I like to call motivated discipline, gridity. It's not about convincing yourself to think positively. It's not about identifying the subconscious programming creating resistance in the first place, the limiting beliefs, the identity distortions, the emotional patterns, the unresolved trauma when it's present, the internal friction that's quietly running beneath the surface, because when those things are addressed at the root, something powerful happens. The resistance begins disappearing. You stop fighting yourself. You stop negotiating with your commitments. You stop constantly starting over. You stop needing motivation to do what needs to be done. Not because you're forcing yourself harder, but because you're becoming someone different. A stronger identity creates stronger behavior. A stronger belief system creates stronger decisions. A stronger internal foundation creates stronger outcomes. This is why identity has to come first. Your mindset will follow your identity. Your actions will follow your identity and become automatic. Behaviors are going to follow your mindset. And eventually the things that once felt difficult begin feeling natural to you. And like I said, action becomes automatic at that point. Your discipline becomes normal, your growth becomes expected, and flow becomes available more frequently. Because flow is not created through effort alone. Flow is created when the mind stops fighting the mission. When your beliefs align with your purpose, when your identity aligns with your potential, when your internal world stops resisting where you're trying to go. Sisu Vita, guys, is a complete rewiring system for limiting beliefs and identity transformation. And I'm talking about total transformation that happens when you stop surviving your life and start leading it. Here is reality number 5. When it's all said and done and you start to rewire your identity, you start to move differently, act differently, talk differently, walk differently, there is a cost. It's called the cost of evolution. So let me prepare you for something, because nobody talks about this part enough. Growth feels amazing, but growth is not free. As you begin removing old programming, you're going to lose some weight. Not physical weight necessarily, but mental weight. You're going to lose the weight of insecurity, the weight of self-doubt, the weight of fear, of comparison, the weight of limiting beliefs you've been carrying for years or decades. And then when that weight starts coming off, you're going to feel lighter. And here's what lighter feels like: clearer, more focused, more confident, more peaceful. You'll start entering flow more often because the resistance you've been fighting begins disappearing. But here's the thing: growth does have another side. As you evolve, some relationships will change. Not because you're becoming better than people, but because you're becoming different than your old self. And different makes people uncomfortable, especially when they've known an older version of you for years. See, some people only know how to relate to the wounded version of you, the insecure version, the distracted version, the fearful version, the version that played small, the version that needed their approval. What happens when you no longer need somebody's approval? How do they feel about you? And when that version begins disappearing, the relationship will change. Some people are going to celebrate your growth. Some people will be inspired by it. Some people will grow alongside of you, but others won't. Some people are going to question you. They're going to resist you. They're going to accuse you of changing. Guess what? You are changing. That is the point. You can't become who you were meant to be while remaining fully attracted to who you used to be. And that's not arrogance. That is growth. See, I experienced this personally through my faith journey. I spent 52 years in a Christian church without truly finding faith. I was around it. I respected it. I understood it intellectually, but it hadn't transformed me internally. And then about 2 years ago, when I turned 50, right before I turned 53, right before I turned 52, something changed. My faith became real, not performative. It wasn't something I talked about. It was something that I lived. I move differently now than I used to. I speak differently. I post differently. I carry more humility. I'm not afraid to talk about God. I'm not afraid to pray in public. I'm not afraid to stand in what I believe. And see, some people love that. And some people probably don't. See, I'm not just about attracting people. I'm about attracting the right people. So it's all okay. Because growth is not about universal approval. It is about alignment. When something becomes real in your soul, you stop performing it and you start living it. And that's one of the greatest gifts of personal growth. You stop needing permission. You stop negotiating with your convictions. You stop shrinking to fit spaces you've outgrown. And that's where flow becomes powerful, because flow is not just productivity. Flow is not just focus. Flow is alignment. The mind is aligned, the body is executing, and the soul is clear. No internal contradiction, no constant negotiation, no endless resistance, just purposeful movement. That is the life of a high-value human. Not perfection, but alignment. Not motivation, but identity. Not performance, but purpose. And guys, I'm going to tell you, when you reach that place, nobody, and I mean nobody, can take it from you. So listen, before we close today, let's bring this all together. You learn that there's a program running beneath the surface of your life, a program built by years of repetition, by family, culture, relationships, fear, painful experiences, by voices that you listened to long enough that they actually became your own. You learn that your patterns expose that programming, not your intentions, not your goals, but your patterns, because your patterns reveal what you truly believe about yourself. You learn that resistance is often not a discipline problem, it's an alignment problem. Your conscious mind wants growth, but your subconscious programming keeps pulling you back toward comfort, familiarity, and safety. You learn that flow is definitely not motivation, but flow is alignment. You learn, hey, my favorite line, flow is what happens when your identity, your beliefs, and your actions finally begin moving in the same direction. And you learn that growth has a cost. And you shed your limiting beliefs. You'll also shed old versions of yourself. Some people will celebrate your evolution. Some people won't understand it. And that's part of becoming who you were created to be. Because you were not born for mediocrity. You were not born to spend your life trapped by thoughts you never consciously chose. You were not born to carry limitations that were handed to you by someone else's fear. You were born with purpose. You were born with responsibility. You were born with the ability to create impact. So the question is, when you leave here today, will you continue protecting the programming that built your limitations, or will you start building the identity that unlocks your potential? Because one of those choices creates resistance and the other creates flow. And flow creates the life you were born to live. Work your body, feed your mind, build your soul. Wake up the warrior. See you next time.
Stuck in your mind, fighting shadows of a story.